I've been doing a wintermester course for school, and I haven't been able to keep up with the show as much. Um, so that's why I've been gone for the last 3 weeks. I had the chance to do a show. I just didn't want to do a bad one. I wanted to make sure I did the same quality that I usually do. Um, so uh, anybody tuning in, I know my uh, future father-in-law was expecting this to start at 8, and it's not. It's almost 9. So I apologize for the late start. But I'm really excited. We had a wonderful week. The last 2 rounds of games actually happened since the last time that I did it. I think when I last left off, uh, we were wondering who would win between Oregon and Ohio State. We were wondering um, what would happen with Boise State if Notre Dame could beat Georgia. I was pretty confident that that wouldn't happen. We'll see how that turned out. Um, so I got an exciting show for you tonight. I believe, let me make sure I know exactly where I'm going with this. My first topic for the evening should be related to the playoff games that just happened recently. Oh, yeah. Ohio State, Texas. What a game. I had a lot of fun watching this game. I think everybody who did enjoyed it. It was it felt like an NFL game, like the way that it was real strong defenses. It felt like any score was massive. It felt like the point of the game was more so to make sure that you didn't lose the game by making mistakes, and give your playmakers time to make plays. Yeah, I think with Sark in Texas, I'm going to start with them first because we'll get to Ohio State after this, and we're going to talk about them a lot more for the rest of the game. But with Sark in Texas, I never think they got exactly what they wanted out of the team this year. Making the semifinal round of the playoffs 2 years in a row is by no means bad. It is really good, and they are one of the top programs in the country right now. I think that they wanted to win the national title this year, and they could have won the national title this year if they could have figured it out offensively. If you watched them, the run game was spirited. Like, it's not like they weren't even trying or anything like that, or they just were getting bullied. They were fighting on the run game, and like on the ground. They were fighting for yards. They were fighting for big plays, opportunities, that such stuff. It just never really culminated in anything significant. They always had to make passes, and even the running backs made plays in the passing game, which was the difference in keeping them in the game for the most part. It's kind of emblematic of their year. They just couldn't get enough out of their offense to win a game. And if you were watching, the defense played so well, man. I think that if I was a Texas defensive player, I would be a little sad that we put on such a great performance against what is a really awesome Ohio State offense. If you think about, they put up 41 on Oregon, and they stopped playing in like the second quarter, third quarter. They put up 42 on Tennessee, which was an amazing defense, and you held them to 28, which included a defensive touchdown. Barely before the second half, or before the first half ended, 75-yard breakaway play that doesn't happen 9 times out of 10. So I think that the Texas defense can hang their heads, or can keep their heads up high. I don't think that they should be ashamed. I also don't think the Texas offense should necessarily be ashamed. It's just the whole year you were hoping that they would find it, that they would make the necessary stride to take a step forward on offense, and they just never did. And it's really unfortunate when you see stuff like that happen, because if you watch them against Arizona State, it was really fun to see Quinn Ewers start dealing at the end. I can talk about that. I'm gonna go through each of the games I missed from the previous round a little bit later. But there was like with Texas. I think that coming in next year, you're gonna have another good quarterback. You're still gonna have weapons on the offense. You're gonna really need to retool that line. Um, I think the real part of the game that spoke a lot was when Texas refused to run the ball at the 1 yard line. If you don't think you can get that, I just don't think you can win a national title. You know what I mean? I mean, maybe you think you're good enough everywhere else that you can make up for that. But football games are won on the ground and with linemen and stuff like that. And I don't know, if you're going to put anybody in motion, why Quinn Ewers? Well, not motion, but you know what I mean. So it's just, I mean, I don't know. I mean, everybody can nitpick about that. I've heard plenty of nitpicking over the last few weeks. Oh, no, over the last week about whether or not that decision was the right decision or whatnot. My brother had some choice words about coaches and their unwillingness to run the ball at the 1 yard line. He was referencing the Seahawks and Patriots Super Bowl. And I was like, well, it's a little bit different with Ohio State and Texas, but I mean, it still rings the same true. You got to get when you have to get 1 yard, it's really just about whether or not you believe in your guys to go get 1 yard. And apparently Sark thought that he had a better idea, one that would give him a better chance to win the game, and ended up being the reason that they lost with that Jack Sawyer scoop and score touchdown. Speaking of Jack Sawyer, Ohio State was everything you wanted them to be in this game, except on the penalty side. They kind of kept Texas in with some key penalties. Texas obviously kept themselves in by playing well defensively and not letting up or not completely quitting on offense or anything like that. Even though they struggled, but Ohio State really, gave them problems. Even like there was a few drives where if Ohio State doesn't have a massive penalty, they could probably score. They could probably at least get within maybe a field goal distance, maybe something like that. So, there's not really. I feel like if you want to, pick away at little things that may have gone in Texas' favor or kept Texas in this game. It's weird to say that because this was a one-score game until the very last defensive, not the very last, but the big defensive stop by Ohio State. So it was the closest 2-touchdown game you'll ever see. But more about Ohio State. I thought defensively they rose to the challenge. Their linebackers seemed very excited. Their DBs, didn't have necessarily the best day, but they were not the ones getting scored on. The 2 touchdown passes came from running backs. And the front seven just really had a good time. It's if I'm looking at what I would have asked for, you just ask your team to do exactly what you're good at, and that's what they did. And that's what led to them winning the game. I don't think they tried to do. The good thing is I don't think they tried to do anything different. I think that's part of. Neither of these teams feel like they have to change themselves to beat a team, any team probably in the country. But Ohio State has definitely, when you watch them play against like a Michigan, or specifically Michigan, you see them try to beat Michigan at their own game, and they didn't try to beat Texas at their own game. They just played Ohio State football, and that was more than good enough to win this game. I want to give a big, shout out to the Ohio State offense. They did a lot of work against a really, really solid Texas defense. This is the best defense in the country, and Ohio State still looked really good. I guess you could say Ohio State's the best offense in the country, but are they? Were people saying that they maybe had the most potential, but they really realized the potential on offense, which has been the big difference. Is they're throwing it around. Those receivers are giving everybody fits. Travion Henderson, big fan of that guy. He did exactly what you wanted after making a big mistake. He made a huge play. That's just a winner play. the type of play a winning player makes, and he made it. And I think with all the noise surrounding him and like some of the stars coming off of the Michigan game and whether or not they were tough, to see them respond in the playoffs and to see them respond in general in moments, especially after he didn't have the best game. He started off pretty rough, and then he didn't have the best game. He hasn't had like an insane game this playoffs, and even still he hasn't. But I mean, it was pretty good. But yeah, so that was the Ohio State and Texas game. Really fun. But there was another game that happened the day before, actually. Notre Dame and Penn State, they fought. It was a great game as well. I think that the 12-team playoff is way more likely to give us quality semifinal and championship round games, and even maybe quarterfinal. But it's way more likely to give us quality games in those stages because you're always going to have teams that deserve to be there that aren't necessarily the best. And I think that's fair to have some blowouts because, I would rather teams that deserve to be there get it than just who we think is subjectively the best getting in. Because I don't think you can prove who's the best unless you let them play it on the field. But specifically, back to the Notre Dame Penn State game. This one kind of left me a little confused because it felt like, well, first of all, I'll talk about Penn State actually. James Franklin, if you had asked me who I thought would win the game, I think I probably would have said Notre Dame. I know hindsight's 2020. Of course, you would have said that. All your other picks were wrong. You probably would have picked Penn State. I'm not a huge Penn State believer, a James Franklin believer. And the marker of when you know a team is good is when they play Penn State and they win. And you might be like, that's a pretty good compliment. And yeah, it is. It's a pretty good compliment. But like playing SMU earlier in the year, the reason I thought that SMU had a chance, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, was because of James Franklin and that the vibe around that team. They beat up on teams that they're better than, and they always find ways to lose games against teams that are even at their level or better than them. And that's exactly what they did in this game. They had the chance to go down and kick a field goal and, walk away, relatively scot-free. It wouldn't have been it would have just been like, oh, we lost a drive. And Drew Aller turns around and throws a game-losing interception. And I feel bad for the kid. Obviously, he didn't play the best, but, it's a big moment. And you just, your heart goes out because I'm sure you could see it. You could see it right after he threw it, too. He was distraught. It was pretty rough. But I think that Penn State, they did a lot well in this game. They came out the gate like firing. They shot out of a cannon, and it was one of those where you're like, uh-oh, like this could get out of hand. Maybe this is one of those games that Notre Dame was once again not ready for, as they have been in the past. But I really respect Marcus Freeman and the guys for sticking through it. They got down, but they didn't. They were down 10-0, I think, at some point. It was like 7-0, 10-0, 10-3. They were down marginally at some point, and then they just didn't go away. They just kept moving the ball, got a field goal, came out of the half, and scored a touchdown, and immediately they're right back in the game. And you're just like, uh-oh, that was Penn State looking like the best that you would get them at, and the game is suddenly tied again. So how did that happen? Notre Dame, I kind of want, this is, I don't know, we'll talk about this later, but I've enjoyed watching them figure out these playoffs, and I've enjoyed watching this team kind of prove the doubters wrong. Notre Dame has, before this playoffs, has not won a significant postseason game in like forever. I don't know if they ever have. Notre Dame is not a postseason team realistically, unless they're playing against smaller programs. But against big programs, they've been pretty bad. But this playoffs, I mean, Marcus Freeman first in his first playoffs, he did what Brian Kelly, what a lot of these Notre Dame coaches uh, throughout the last couple decades could never do, which is win big games. Um, and against Indiana, they dominated. The game ended up only winning by 10, but they controlled the game really well. Um, and against Georgia, which we'll get to a little bit, they did exactly what they needed to do, and they came in again this week against Penn State, and they just did exactly what they needed to do. And yeah, the ball bounced their way a couple times with that pick, and just in the second half in general. And they made some plays. I mean, there was a guy who I don't remember his name. I think it was number 1 or number 5 on Notre Dame, the wide receiver, who just made a play. I mean, I don't know the name of the kid. I didn't know it going into the game. I still don't know it coming out of the game. That might be a little bit of an indictment on me. He had a great game, but he made a play, and that's exactly what you need to go on a run in these kind of situations. Is you need players who don't really care that it's not supposed to be their moment. They're just there to make a big play. And so, yeah, I mean, Notre Dame, especially impressive. Let me see. Marcus Freeman, does he have a big future ahead? I mean, this is his second, third year at Notre Dame, and he's already in the national title. I mean, anybody who can make the national title in a playoff format from Notre Dame, I have a lot of respect for, because with the academic standards that Notre Dame has, with a lot of the external things that Notre Dame feels like they should be, there's a lot of pressure. And it's funny because at the biggest private school in the country it's not the biggest private school in the country, Harvard, but you know what I mean, at like one of the most prestigious college football universities in the country, he's just found a way to be like an underdog, which has worked well for them. And in a way, they kind of are. A lot of people didn't really expect them. A lot of people thought Indiana had a really good chance to beat them. A lot of people thought they'd lose to Georgia. And a lot of people thought they'd lose to Penn State. And they just, keep winning. They've got 2 wins over the Big Ten now. They're looking for their third. They got 1 win over the SEC. If the season ended right now, I'd say give them a lifetime contract. It's everything that you could ever want, and I would bet that he's going to be around long enough. I did not think coming into this year that a team with Riley Leonard at quarterback, not to say he's bad, but he's limited at the highest level. A team with him at quarterback and without like a big star. I mean, they've got Jeremiah Love in the backfield, who's a big star. But without like a big star on the edge, you know what I mean? Like a big receiver that could take over a game or something like that, or a big DN that will take over a game or something like that. I didn't really think, there's quality names on that roster. There's no Heisman candidates, at least as of this year. I feel like Jeremiah Love has gotten some whispers for maybe next year, but I mean, even that would be a little bit more of a Notre Dame fan take. So, yeah, I mean, Notre Dame did really well. I thought this last weekend of games was really fun. I've got a little bit of a review of the general last round of the playoff, or what was it? Like the round of the playoffs. Oh, the quarterfinals. Yeah, the quarterfinals. I want to go through each game really quickly because that was another fun round. Texas, Arizona State. Man, I'm so mad because I was so close. Okay, I mean, if you had interviewed me right after that game, if I'd gone on air right after the game, you would have heard me be very mad about the potential flukiness of the way the calls went, of all that. You would have heard me say a lot of negative things about the the security of college football officiating. I don't remember the whatever, like whether or not it's trustworthy. Because that was a really rough end to the game for those officials. But, I mean, I'm proud of Arizona State. I think that they proved they belong there. They did against a really good Texas team. They scored 31 on it on the best defense in the playoffs. So I thought that they played really well. I mean, of course, I'm a Big 12 fan. You're seeing me wearing a Baylor shirt. So I was kind of rooting for them to win, and they were my upset pick outside of SMU. They're a pick I thought that I would have a good chance of getting, and they almost proved me right. But they lost to a team that had Quinn Ewers, who was experienced and made a lot of big plays. And yeah, I think that it's funny because the you would have thought that the way the game went on the stat sheet that Arizona State played a better game, and they did. I think Arizona State played a better game. Texas did the things they needed to do to win, though, which is what winning teams do, which is what Sark has built at Texas. So that's a compliment to UT. I mean, I just have that was a fun game to watch. Even though I was in the mall with my fiance. She was looking for a top for some pictures we were taking, and I was sitting in the Hollister waiting room. I think it was Hollister, and I was like squat down, I was watching the game, and I was locked in, so for like a good hour. So that was a lot of fun. Probably the most entertaining game outside of the next one that they played. I would say that was honestly a more entertaining game than the Ohio State Texas one, but both of them were great. Oregon, Ohio State, man, what a rout. I don't have too much to say about this one. I'm kind of disappointed in Oregon. Of course, we'll talk about my picks here in just a second, but there was a little. I told you the last time that I spoke that I was really nervous because of the way that Ohio State came out against Tennessee. And my nervous was correct because they came out the exact same speed against Oregon, and Oregon was done immediately. It was over. The game was over in like the first half, or like the first quarter. It was done. And immediately I knew that I was going to have to come back onto this show and apologize for how bad that Oregon National Championship pick looks now. But, I mean, it is what it is. I think that if for teams like Oregon, I understand if the fans are upset that they got probably the least lucky draw out of everybody because they had to play Ohio State in the second round, and Ohio State was clearly better than the 8th seed. But I don't think there's any remedy because Ohio State lost 2 regular season games, one to a 7-5 Michigan team that actually did end up going on to beat Alabama. So it's not like they were bad, but nobody thought that they were that good, and Ohio State lost to them. And so there's really no way that you can create a format that will prepare. This is what I think it's Shenyan. It's something. He's on Twitter. Really good reporter for CBS. I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his name, but he said this before I did, so I'm not going to steal his stuff. But yeah, I don't think there's any way that there's a format who can correctly predict or correctly make adjustments for probably the best team or the potentially best team in the country losing 2 games that they probably shouldn't have lost. I mean, the loss at Oregon looks more understandable now because it was probably just a home environment. But yeah. Penn State, Boise State. This one hurts my heart. I picked Boise State because it was the one game that I didn't pick correctly from the first round. But I still really wanted Boise State to win, and they got so close to. I mean, I guess they didn't really get that close. But if you look at the stat sheet, if you even watch the game, you might say, oh well, yeah, like Boise State had to work so hard for everything they got. Yeah, and they got a lot. Boise State was completed drives away from potentially winning the game. And that's a big if. So that's not to say that I think they got robbed or anything. I think that like SMU and like a lot of the future games you're going to see in this is teams that are a completed drive away are are probably going to get blown out. They can be really good. Boise State was really good. Maddox Madsen, great quarterback. Ashton Junty was fighting. I know a lot of people hated on him for the game. He was amazing. Um, and the Boise State defense played pretty well, but when you can't complete the drive consistently, kind of like, um, I mean, like a lot of the teams, like Clemson didn't complete some of their drives. Um, Indiana didn't complete some of their drives. Stuff like that. Arizona State even didn't complete a couple of their drives. A few of them, actually, I think. That's the difference between winning a game and losing a game. And in this format, you're going to play teams that are less likely to be like that, or not even less likely to be like that, more likely to make you pay for making mistakes like that. And so, yeah, it was that one kind of hurt because I was really hoping Boise State would use some of their magic, because I was just hoping for some interesting games at that point because we hadn't had too many close games. But I mean, it was a fun game. It was an enjoyable one. I don't think that I think a competitive game, which that was, is fun. And so, I mean, I had fun watching it. Was not surprised by the outcome. I think that anybody who knew the talent difference, like the star rating talent difference, knew that it could get out of hand and that Penn State could force Boise State into tough situations, but especially with how much they loaded the box, or at least locked in on the run. But it was, I mean, I still think Boise State played well. I don't think, I mean, like, the story should not be, oh, Boise State didn't deserve to be there. The story should be Boise State had a good team, and they made their way into the playoffs, and they had a great season, and they got beat short by a team who was the second or third best team in the Big Ten all year. And so, I don't think any of the teams that lost should be looked at negatively. I think they're all great teams, and they all deserve to be looked at in a positive light. Speaking of which, Notre Dame versus Georgia was my surprise of the week. I came on here last time and told you that I thought that the game that Texas played against Clemson proved that Georgia was really good against the run, and then Notre Dame turned around and beat Georgia anyway. And I I really have no excuse. I was fooled. I thought that the Georgia team would come out. I was kind of maybe hopeful that the Georgia team would come out with Gunnar Stockton looking fresh and looking excited, and playing a very inspired brand of football. And it just didn't happen. Not that I don't think they didn't care or anything like that, or that they weren't good enough to win. They didn't come out with that same drive that I thought they would. And so it was oh boy, he's trying to drink my water. I think that started to make me believe in Notre Dame, because I think from the first round you learn that home field is a massive advantage, especially amongst the best teams when they're playing other really good teams. In the second round, you learn who really. I mean, of course, everybody of course, the people who win really have a shot at taking the title. But I mean, you learn who's really about it, and when things get tough, who's really there. And Georgia, I mean, was fighting, and it looked like they were just it looked like they were just a play or two away from getting right back into the game and potentially winning. But just like I said with Arizona State and Boise State, you can't be a player two away. You have to be a player two there if you want to win in the playoffs. And that's just what, I mean, you just have to make it count when it matters. You cannot afford to leave points on the table. You can't afford to make those kinds of mistakes in the playoffs because you're playing too good of quality teams. And that's the difference between, losing like Arizona State did, where even though they made some mistakes, they still capitalized and threw the kitchen sink at Texas at the end, and losing like SMU, who, they started off hot, but they just could. I mean, they started their first drive off was going well, but they just couldn't complete it. So, yep, those are a little bit of the recap of the last 2 weeks of the playoffs. Now I want to look at speaking. I mean, we've been talking a lot about the playoffs and my predictions for the playoffs. I might have a little bit of explaining to do. As you can see, my lovely producer Daniela should be bringing up on the screen my playoff predictions from before the playoffs started. Yeah, I have some explaining to do. This did not go well. I mean, the first round I picked well. It's funny. I was an inch away from picking Tennessee. I was probably the only other game that I would have switched. I think I was pretty sure that Notre Dame would win. I didn't really know I didn't know enough about Indiana to pick them, and I thought Texas was better than Clemson, even though I kind of wanted. I kind of thought that Dabo Swinney would come out with maybe something interesting, but sorry about that. But yeah, the SMU pick, I think what I've seen from the playoffs, like I was telling you, led me to believe that if anyone was going to do it, it was going to be SMU in the first round. And I thought that because of who they were playing, one, and like the talent level that SMU has, they might be a surprisingly good talent level, but I mean, a lot of those kids come from Texas. You're gonna have tons of athletes, and they do, and they did, and there was they had things that could help them be able to win a game like that. Which could be useful against a team like Penn State. But like I said, it's just the difference of completing your drives, of making the most of those times you get down in the 15 and the 10 and the 20. And they didn't, and they simply made the worst. Kevin Jennings went from looking like he could have the game of his career on that first drive to looking like to having the worst game of his career throughout pretty much the entire time since that fourth down play until the rest of the game. And there was a bunch of moments where you thought maybe there was some life there, and they kept fighting, but it just kept being mistake after mistake. And what I didn't give enough credit to, I think, was how significant that home field advantage was going to be. And yes, the home field advantage in general is going to be strong for any team, but I mean for Penn State, I think especially for Penn State, it's massive. And so when you see a team like Penn State make it, if A&M ever makes it, there's some programs around the country that you are not going to want to play at, and that is going to be a huge ask to go in there and win. And SMU just wasn't up to that challenge. So that pick was a little bit of a wash, and I had them in the second round and in the quarterfinal or in the semifinals. And that is not what happened. And what was another one? Oh, Arizona State. I feel validated in the Arizona State pick. I just talked about that game a lot. I think that a lot of the things that I thought could happen did. And you might say, well, the only reason they were in the game was because at the very end they threw some kind of trick plays. They threw some special stuff that isn't really like real football. I mean, it's real football, but you know what I mean. And I think that's a valid assessment. But I also think that they played generally better for most of the game. It was just a punt return touchdown, and it was some mistakes down inside the 20 that kept Arizona State from being closer in the game, or at least making it feel like it was closer. And then the explosion at the end, I think, was exemplary of what they had done before. And so, I mean, they had more yards. They had way higher time of possession, and that's credit to Texas as well because they scored faster when they did. But they played well, and so I felt validated. I feel like, I mean, when you get an overtime game, that means your pick was good either way. You had a solid reasoning, especially if you picked the underdog and they went to overtime. You had a solid pick. But so that one, I wouldn't have picked them to beat Ohio State or Oregon. I definitely wouldn't have picked them to beat Ohio State, seeing how hot they were coming off of that next week. But I feel like I'm not mad. I mean, obviously, in hindsight 2020, Texas was obviously the more likely team to win, but I just felt like Arizona State could make some noise, and they did. What's another prediction? Oh my gosh. Oregon to win the national championship against Georgia. They both lost in their first games. They scored a combined 31 points, which isn't that bad, I guess. But for two teams that I said were going to be in the national title, they did not play like two teams who deserve to be in the national title. Man. Starting off with Oregon, it was over immediately. And when you pick a team to win the national championship, you know that they're good at some things. And honestly, if you had asked me before, what did Oregon really do amazing? I don't know if I would have been able to tell you. I would have told you they were the most complete team. And that might have not even been true. I don't think I would have even fully believed that. I think I would have seen some things that would lead me to believe that they were the most complete team. But there wasn't really, like, if the play, what you have to learn is that at some point, or in some playoffs, it's going to be the potential is what's the difference. Like in this playoffs, the potential team, which was Ohio State, and even Texas to a degree, and even Notre Dame to a degree, the potential of those teams was the most important thing, because those teams reached higher potential than teams that were in front of them. Texas not necessarily, because I talked about how their offense never really realized what they could. But Ohio State for sure and Notre Dame for sure. Those teams had the potential to do the things that they did in the playoffs, and they did it. And in some playoffs, you might get where it's not potential, but it's what you've seen that leads to, like kind of what you would think. And that might be the way the playoffs is going forward. That might be an anomaly going forward. Who knows? But with Oregon, that's what I thought. I thought that what I'd seen would be enough to just be like, I think this is going to be a what I've seen kind of playoffs. And it was not a what I've seen kind of playoffs. It was definitely a potential kind of playoffs, because Georgia, well, I guess you could say Georgia didn't realize their full potential, but Georgia kind of showed you what you've seen. I mean, if you watched the SEC championship game, you weren't necessarily impressed. You were impressed by their grit, by their toughness, not necessarily by their football, which the SEC had a tough playoffs. Relatively, they had a tough playoffs compared to how they're usually supposed to be. For three teams, you had one team go out in every round except the championship game, which is not, I don't think, what the SEC wants. And the Big Ten has risen up, but I think I'll get back to that in just a second. But yeah, Oregon as my national champion was, I don't think it was a bad pick. It just, they ran into what had the chance to be the best team, who got hot at the right time. And that's exactly who's going to win most of the time, the team that gets hot at the right time. I think that the bye games, I think this is my overall bigger CFB take. The bye game is not good for you. Bye is not a benefit most of the time for teams that are already going to be on a week break. If you were doing this during the season, like let's say your championship game, everybody plays the championship game, and then the conference championship get a bye week, and then they play the week after the next week. So they play the week after the Army-Navy game. If you did it like that, I think it'd be better, but you don't do it like that, and they'll never do it like that. So the bye week after like a few weeks of rest is already not good. You need a warm-up. That's why I always said 8 teams, because bye games in college football are not good. Home games in college football are overpowered. I feel like that's the two of the things we learned here. But it doesn't matter. I think that the only way we'll get a change to that is if they expand the playoff, which I don't want them to do. I only wanted 8, and they went 12, and people are talking about 14 and 16. I don't think we need that. I think there's already enough teams that are getting blown out. I think that 12 is enough to to have all the best teams that can win the national title in, while probably also having some dead weight in there as well. I think 4 had some of that some years too. So, but yeah, those are my overall playoff thoughts. Here, wait, let me see. What? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, oh yeah. I want to talk about the Big Ten and their place in college football. I think if you had come into the year and you said who are the best conferences in the country, a lot of people would have just said the SEC. You would have got some Big Ten. You would have got maybe some Big 12, some ACC, in that order, something like that. It would have been a SEC, small gap, Big Ten, medium gap, Big 12, and then ACC. I think that's what the majority of people would say. But the way that the year has gone, there were 4 teams from the Big Ten in the top 5 for most of the year, or for a lot of the year. It was Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana in the top 5 for most of the year until Indiana and Ohio State played. And that kind of felt validated by the way the playoffs has gone. I think Oregon could have done damage if they didn't only play Ohio State. Penn State, who had the easiest road to be fair, made the semifinal. Who else? Indiana only lost by, they got beat up. They were the 4th team. Think about it. They were the 4th team from the SEC, or the SEC. I keep getting the conferences mixed up. They were the 4th team from the Big Ten, and they played competitively to a degree against Notre Dame. They kind of played conservatively, which I think is part of the reason why they lost. But the way that this has gone, you have to believe that the Big Ten is at the forefront of college football right now. They're likely to have the champion based on what most people would say. They're likely to have 2 champions in a row, which hasn't happened in forever. When was the last time that the SEC? When was the last time a conference not named the SEC won 2 titles in a row? Maybe USC, I think. I don't know. It's been a while. Because Clemson won every other year for 2 or 3 or so years. And then Ohio State won. Michigan won once. Florida State won once. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, so it's a big deal. I feel like, especially with the performance in the bowl games, I was not impressed by the SEC. I think they still, they didn't do bad. It just was not what, based on this supposed disparity in college football conference strength levels, it does not align with that. It doesn't align with that for me, based on the games. And I think if you watch the Big Ten, they were pretty impressive in a lot of their games. So weirdly, when a rising tide raises all ships, and the quality of football clearly got better because Michigan was able to win last year, and you brought in Washington, who was the other team, and although Washington obviously lost the coaching staff and stuff like that, you just bring quality teams like Oregon, who was really good last year too. And of course, that's going to make the conference better. And Indiana somehow just explodes onto the scene. So with all of that, you got a lot better. And I think a lot of people weren't ready for it. And so, yeah, I don't think that the difference in general college football conference level is as big as people want to say. I think that the Big Ten was the best this year. I think that the SEC was behind it. And I think that the Big 12 was behind that, and the ACC was behind that. And I think that the Big Ten and the SEC have for most years since 2010, 2011, they've had the best team. One of them has had the best team in the country. And most of the time, they've had the best 2 or 3. Maybe combined between them, they've had at least the best. Maybe sometimes the best too. There have been years where Oklahoma State in 2011 was really good. Oklahoma in 2017, Baylor TCU 2014, I'm trying to think who else was really good in different years. But either way, So usually those conferences would have the best, and I think that's true still. I just don't think that once you get past that, that those teams are just so much better than anybody could possibly imagine, from the smaller or from the Big 12 and ACC levels. I kind of wish we'd go to what we used to have with like the Big 8 Southwest Conference, stuff like that, because I feel like you'd have spread out quality of conferences, so you wouldn't have to worry about like, oh, is this conference capable, is that conference capable? You would just have a bunch of quality conferences. But I mean, I digress. The Yeah, so I got a lot of predictions wrong. I got my first half. No, my first round of predictions was really good. Second half of predictions went bad. And if I had to say, who would I have picked last week? Between Ohio State and Texas, I think I would have gone Ohio State. I think you had to go Ohio State if you're really like trying to bet on it. Even though I wouldn't bet on it. And if I had to pick between Notre Dame and Penn State, I probably would have picked Notre Dame because I'm really not a fan of James Franklin. I think I would have wanted to pick Texas in the Texas Ohio State game because I'm from Texas, and so it's just genuinely just home state bias. And I kind of wanted Texas to win while I was watching it. I know I'm a Baylor fan, but like they're playing in Arlington, so I was kind of like I kind of got like a Texas pride about me. So I was like, I don't want anybody to walk in and beat us, and us as in the state. And Ohio State did it, so they were worthy of it. And Ohio State has so many moments against South teams in South. Like I flash back to the first playoff where you had the semifinal with Ohio State and Alabama, where Ezekiel Elliott runs like was it 85 yards for a touchdown, and you had the Travion Henderson 75-yard touchdown. I mean, I don't know, and the Jack Sawyer scoop and score for a touchdown. Like that's probably a better comparison. But like yeah, I mean, hilarious. But I think based on the way that it went, my Theo Raymond asked me who I thought would win the national championship because my pick was Oregon and they lost. And I told him I think you have to go with Ohio State, but Texas had the potential. So yeah, but of course hindsight, I'm not going to count that. That's just if you wanted to know. I think that I probably would have gone with that. And then I got the quarterfinals. No, I got the home rounds all right except one. I got the next round all wrong except one. Right? Yes. Yeah, and so that's pretty much it because I didn't make the decision. But I've got the chance to predict one more game this year, and it's the biggest game of the year, the national championship game, Ohio State and Notre Dame. If you had said Ohio State Notre Dame before the beginning of the year, I think a lot of people would have been like, Ohio State Notre Dame. This is a pretty exciting matchup. I don't think. Here's what I'm gonna tell you. I don't think that. I think that there's a good chance that this game might get out of hand, because that's just kind of. It feels like after all the emotions, that happen, that conspire over the course of the playoffs, you're way more likely to have a big letdown in a game like this. So, Ohio State was an 8-point favorite the last time I looked at it, and I think that's pretty fair. It's a neutral site. Where is it being played? It's being played in Atlanta. Not a bad trip for either fan base. I would imagine Ohio State's going to show up in bigger numbers. It's an exciting game. I'm excited to see Marcus Freeman coach against his old team. I think that the Notre Dame coaching staff and the Notre Dame players don't really care what the expectation is. I don't think many people thought that they'd beat Georgia. I don't think many people thought that they'd beat Penn State. I think a lot of people thought that they might lose to Indiana. So, and they've been hearing that noise the whole time. So people like me saying that I think they're going to lose this game, I think it's just fuel to the fire. And we'll see. I'm interested to see the Notre Dame rushing game. Obviously the big matchup that everybody's going to be talking about. I don't know why I'm burping so much. The big matchup that everybody's going to be talking about is that Ohio State front seven that had a really good game against the Texas offense versus um, the Notre Dame rushing attack. And the wrinkle that Texas didn't use as much as you would have wanted, that Notre Dame will probably use more, is the running quarterback. Texas used Arch Manning, and he had that one moment where it looked like he kind of fumbled it, but I guess he didn't. It was pretty close. Um, but and outside of that, they did really good against the run. But when on that play, I mean, it was creative and they found ways. And so, I mean, I think that if Notre Dame wants to win this game, they're going to have to, one, control the clock. I mean, it's going to be basic, fundamental football. Control the clock, put the ball on the ground, be creative. Try to save Riley Leonard from taking too many hits, especially in the first half. If he can go pretty hit-free in the first half, then I think he'll be primed to maybe take a few hits in the second half that will be important for the game. And for the Ohio State front seven, you're asking for a similar performance that you had last week. If you can put up the same performance against what is a better rushing attack, you're going to win this game. If this matchup, I'll just say this now, if this matchup goes Ohio State's way, I think it's extremely unlikely. Like if you told me like Notre Dame's going to rush for 97 yards, like total, and then and then minus any sacks would be added onto that. I'll tell you, that's not going to win the game. I don't really need to hear the rest of it unless Riley Leonard has the passing game of his life. I think that you're going to need a good game on the ground, but I do think Notre Dame is capable of that. I think if they don't let Ohio State get ahead early, even if they do, let's say Ohio State jumps up to a 14-point lead. If Notre Dame keeps it on the ground and, puts a touchdown up, gets a stop, stuff like that, they can still find a way to control the game and control the flow of the game, even if they're not in the lead. So I think that the way Ohio State wins this game is either stopping them on the ground or absolutely obliterating them through the air. I think Notre Dame was really good against Penn State. Gave them a lot of problems. Gave that offense a lot of problems, even though they came out rushing really well. I think Ohio State can run the ball, like Judkins and Henderson. Great runners. I think that they're both going to be able to fall forward a lot of the time. But I think that the Penn State running backs came out with a fire, and you're going to need to replicate that if you want to do well, because after that, they weren't able to do as much. And I think that Penn State has a quality rushing attack. So what I think Drew Aller and Will Howard might have some similar issues. Will Howard is better, right? I think Will Howard is better. But they're both prone to making mistakes. I think Will Howard is actually pretty turnover prone. And he's a lot of the time the reason that the opposing team finds themselves in forgiving situations, like in this previous round against Texas, kind of like Drew Aller was. And I think if the Notre Dame can get pressure onto Will Howard, they don't even need that much. They just need one play where he just makes one of his mistakes, and you get put in a good position, and you can turn that into points. So, I mean, I think that there's a real way Notre Dame can win this game. My father-in-law was telling me that he really thought Notre Dame was going to win this game. I feel like I kind of want, I'll tell you who I want to win games, just for my own subjective reasons. Like, it's funny because anytime you watch a game and something good happens for a team, you know who you want to win. Because if you're like, oh, then you're like, oh yeah, I don't want that team to win. But if you're like, oh, then you're like, yeah, I do want that team to win. And I can just feel it already. When Ohio State does well, I'm gonna be like, oh, and when Notre Dame does well, I'll be like, yo. So I think I'm already starting to I'm someone who's gonna root for an underdog, and so being a -8 or an 8-point underdog is clearly an underdog. So especially in a national title game, and I also kind of want a fun game. But for me, I am not going to stray away from what I think makes sense. I feel like Notre Dame has to do more um, that would be counter to what I would think would happen than Ohio State does. Do I believe Ohio State can get passing through the air? Yes. Do I believe Ohio State can run the ball? Yes. Do I believe Ohio State can make plays on defense enough to slow the running game down, maybe put Riley Leonard in uncomfortable passing situations? Yes. And so I think that I feel like I'm more confident in the things that I know that Ohio State does well than I am confident in the things that I know Notre Dame does well. And so with that, I'm going to choose Ohio State to win the national championship. Another kind of snuck up run. I mean, the two times Ohio State, if Ohio State goes on to win, the two times Ohio State would have won the national championship would be from these runs where they kind of not necessarily came out of nowhere, but they kind of snuck in, or they kind of fell back. Well, no, because Cardell Jones, never mind. Like in 2014, they kind of backed their way into the playoffs because the two teams from the Big 12 didn't play a championship game against each other. And then this year, they backed into the playoffs and they lost the game and fell out of their Big Ten championship, and then managed to go on a tear after because they just reset. I think that the Notre Dame, for Ohio State, I think that the Michigan loss was great for them. But that's a whole other point. I think that is exactly what they needed. But Ohio State, my 2024-2025 national championship pick. I think if you had asked who would have won the national championship at the beginning of the year, Ohio State would have been on that list. Texas, Georgia would have been on the list. Baylor would have been on the list. Yeah, all very reasonable teams. But yeah, so I'm going to do a quick rendition of Big 12 Corner. I believe I have like 10 minutes left for about an hour, maybe a little bit less than that. But we're going to do Big 12 Corner because I still want to run through. I think I only have about 2 minutes left, actually, but I'm going to go a little bit over. So, so the first team we have is Colorado, and this has been on the news recently. Deion Sanders is talking to the Cowboys, and I mean, clearly Deion Sanders is not coming out and saying, I'm not talking to them. Deion Sanders is not coming out and saying, I'm here for the rest of my life. Everybody knows that that's not the case, but usually coaches will come out and say something if they're not planning on taking a job. So I think that there's legitimacy to this. It kind of makes me sad. As a Big 12 fan, I've enjoyed having Deion Sanders. I'm not a Deion Sanders hater. I think he's a little annoying sometimes, with just how much Deion Sanders is. You know what I mean? But I'm not necessarily going to be happy to see him go. I think that he brings a lot to the conference. He's entertaining as heck. He has Colorado at a weirdly power school level of interest from players. And so I think it's good for him to stay in the conference. And if I'm the Big 12, I'm trying to do everything I can to keep him at Colorado. And if I'm Colorado, I'm trying to do everything I can to keep him at Colorado. But I would say this season was a wonderful success. And I feel like a lot of people kind of had some negative thoughts about it after they lost to BYU. I don't think anything negative about it. I mean, you had a player win the Heisman. You had Shedeur Sanders, who's been great. I think that your team, I think BYU was just criminally underrated and they felt disrespected and they came out and played like it. But realistically, I think that Colorado did a lot of great things this season. I think that they came out and splashed in the Big 12. They set themselves up for future success. I mean, if you think about it, they were picked like bottom 5 in the Big 12. I mean, to be fair, you could say that about a lot of the bottom 5 teams. They were picked bottom 5 and they ended up being a lot better. But Colorado especially was maybe not bottom 5, but like bottom half at least, and they finished 3rd or 4th. And they finished 4th technically because they lost to BYU. But it was. I think if I'm them, it was a great season. I think that the real issue is if Deion Sanders is out, what comes next? Uh, I don't know who they'd hire. I mean, it's like losing the one. It's like the one that got away. I mean, if if um, you know, if Deion Sanders were to leave, who could you replace them? Who could you replace them with? Like, who's gonna fill the Deion Sanders void in Colorado football's life? I don't think anybody's gonna be able to do it. Um, you might need to bring in a complete opposite of him, like a real sturdy, you know, like running a wishbone offense type of coach. Um, but I don't think. I mean, I don't know. I think they're gonna do everything they can to keep him there. But if he stays, which I hope he does, and I think there's a good chance that he does, if he stays, then I'm really excited about them next year. I don't think they're going to be as good. I think defensively they made a lot of strides, and if they keep improving on the defensive side, it should be good. But I think you're losing big talent pieces. You're losing Travis Hunter. You're losing Shedeur Sanders. You're losing Shiloh Sanders, who a lot of people memed on. Even I memed on somewhat. But I mean, those are three really solid players. Well, there's one really solid player and two superstars, and so any team that has that happen is going to take a step back. They have Caden Slater. I don't. It's not. It's Salter, isn't it? Kadon Salter, something like that. Slated to come in as a transfer, and you have, I believe, Julian Newman as your high-level quarterback recruit. So I mean, they're tool for the future, and if anybody has the most talent in the conference, probably like the most 4 stars would be TCU and Colorado, and so Colorado's on that list. And so I think next year, maybe looking at 8-4 if Deion stays. If he leaves though, I mean the next coach is gonna be a really rough position because a lot of those players are there specifically to be with Deion. A lot of those coaches are there specifically to coach with Deion. So unless you could keep somebody from the current coaching staff and just move them to head coach, and like you're confident and they're good, and then I think you might have to clean house, and I think you'd have to start from the bottom up. So I'm hoping that he stays because it makes Colorado a much more interesting team heading into next year. The next team that I'm talking about is Houston, the Houston Cougars. Um, Another lackluster season for Houston. It's not the way they wanted to jump into the Big 12. I think that if you asked them before they got in the conference, if you said, Houston, in your first year, you're going to beat Baylor on the road, and in your second year, you're going to beat TCU on the road, and you just didn't tell them anything, they'd be like, hey, we might be finding something here. Like TCU and Baylor are usually middle to better in the Big 12. And they actually beat a good TCU team on the road this year, but for whatever reason, it just never came together for them. And I mean, defensively, they were good. Like they were one of the better defensive teams in the conference, and they gave a lot of the best offenses fits. But offensively, they were dead in the water. And I think if you're a Houston fan, there's reason to be excited because with Connor Weigman coming in, the Texas A&M transfer, you're looking at having a guy who can be a playmaker, who can be exactly what you were looking for, while still maintaining a lot of what you had on defense. You're probably going to lose guys, but to draft, I don't know exactly who they lost, but I trust Willie Fritz as a defensive coach, and I trust him as a coach in general. And his offenses at Tulane were good, so I don't see why they couldn't get good again. I think that Houston is a team that I actually have a little bit of dark horse potential for. I think it might not be a popular take, but if they could just they got the quarterback. If they could just, figure it out on offense. If they could be a mediocre offense next year, like a top 60 offense next year, and keep the defensive quality, maybe even get a little bit better, they're going to be competing towards the top half, at least of the Big 12. And that's exactly where they want to be in year 3. And so I think there's reason for excitement. I think you have a good coach. I think that there's not I mean, yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to be panicking or you had to deal with a year of, it was Dana Holgerson, right? So that was clearly a setback. But yeah, Houston, love the powder blues. They played with those against Baylor. They gave Baylor's offense, who was amazing the second half of the season, a lot of fits in the game they played. And so with that, I mean, from I watched that whole game, and so I saw a lot of what Houston could do. If and I definitely saw what they couldn't do on offense against a relatively decent Baylor defense. But yeah, so that's Houston. They have some exciting prospects, but they're the worst of these three from the last few years. The final team that I'm going to be talking about is the Big 12 championship runner-up, Iowa State Cyclones. The Campbell train. He, once again, I mean, I I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Campbell gets a statue at Iowa State. Um, for what he has done with that program. That program was like dead in the water for however long. I'm a Baylor fan, I know, based on like the years before our Bryles got there. And he came in and he turned them into a consistently hard playing team. And then he turned them into a team that sometimes actually beats teams that they're not supposed to beat. And now they're consistently finding a way to be competitive every 2 to 3 years. You're going to get, my thought is, not this year, but the next year they're going to drop off. But this upcoming year, they're probably going to be pretty good. I don't know if they're going to make the Big 12 championship again. It's going to be difficult. Maybe their schedule is going to be better or worse. Who knows? I don't know what's going to happen. But either way, I mean, they're going to have a good team. They have a lot of really good players coming back. And if it's an exciting time to be an Iowa State fan. I think that the one issue you're starting to see is that maybe Matt Campbell has a big game problem. And I mean, a lot of coaches have a big game problem. I would say most coaches in their careers don't have a positive uh, win percentage against teams in the top 25 at all. And so it's not surprising that teams struggle against good teams more than against bad teams. But yeah, Matt Campbell made the Big 12 championship twice. The first time against Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley, he had a better chance to win, apparently. And this year, they just got completely whacked by what was a good Arizona State team and a hot Arizona State team. But they looked like they didn't belong in that game. And so I know that's not the standard that they want to have there. And I know they want to convert those big years of getting there into winning. And hey, this is their first 10 win, 11 win season. They had a great bowl game against Miami. And I know a lot of people would say that they only beat Miami because Cam Ward came out in the second half. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but I think that they played good enough to beat Miami, and so they won. And so they were missing a lot of pieces too. So yeah, I mean, Iowa State, year in review, they beat Kansas State again. They beat Iowa. I mean, it was a great year for them. The best year in school history, I mean, wins wise. And so, but they're still not over the hump. And it's interesting. I wonder what will get them there. You know, what does Matt Campbell and what does that coaching staff think will finally get them from being really good and being championship contender to being a championship winner in the Big 12 specifically. And I mean, maybe in college football, but as a whole. But yeah, either way, I think they'd be excited with the year. They were picked to finish in the top half of the conference, and they finished second. So they weren't a huge surprise. I think people realized that with Becht, who has looked like he was becoming a rising star, with him moving into a more after getting some experience, him playing another year, he would be good. You had Abu Sama come back. Good receivers. I would say sneaky good because I didn't know a lot about them coming into the year. I think a lot of people did, but good receivers, solid defense. I feel like they were one of the Big 12 teams that hurt the chance. Of course, it's not their fault necessarily that the rest of the Big 12 wasn't as good, but like, they lost to Kansas like BYU did. Both of those teams, if they had won that game against Kansas, they would both been in contention to make the playoffs as an at-large seed. So we need teams like Iowa State and BYU, or teams in those positions, to win those games so that the Big 12 gets more representation. But I think Iowa State fans should be happy. I think Houston fans can be optimistic. I think Colorado fans might be a little bit worried, but they should also be excited about the potential of the future. So I think a lot of teams have a lot of reason to be excited about the future. The Big 12 is a wide open conference. I, as a Baylor fan, am very excited about next year. It's going to be a lot of fun. But yeah, I think that's all I have for you guys today. I believe I went maybe like 10, 15 minutes over. So sorry to keep you up late, but I just had too much fun talking about my Big 12 corner teams and about college football as a whole. Happy National Championship Week. I am rooting for Notre Dame, but I believe Ohio State's going to win, so I'm going to be right or I'm going to be happy. So a win-win for me. I guess you could say a lose-lose too, but who knows? With that, I'm going to end the show out. I really appreciate you for watching. God bless and have a good night.